The galaxy was vast, filled with countless stars, planets, and civilizations. Among those civilizations, two great powers had risen higher than all others. One was the Zelthar Dominion, a people of immense discipline and advanced machines. The other was the Vayrene Alliance, proud and skilled in the ways of strategy and power. For hundreds of years, these two empires fought one another. Their war began over a single misunderstanding. But as decades turned into centuries, the reason was lost. It no longer mattered who started it. The war itself became the identity of both empires. Every new generation was born into the struggle, trained from childhood to serve the war effort, and taught that the enemy must never win. Worlds were burned, fleets destroyed, and soldiers gave their lives in battles that changed little. A system might fall to the Dominion one year and be taken back by the Alliance the next. Planets with cities of millions were reduced to ash and silence, yet still the war did not end. It was said among the smaller species of the galaxy that this was a conflict no one could stop. The Dominion would never surrender and the Alliance could never give in. The galaxy had grown used to endless battles. Peace was nothing more than a dream. Despite the horror, there was a strange balance. Each empire matched the other. When the Dominion built larger warships, the Alliance developed stronger defenses. When the Alliance created new weapons, the Dominion responded with new shields. The war never tilted too far to one side. Victory was always just out of reach, and so the fight continued. For the people living in neutral systems, life was difficult. Trade routes were blocked, colonies were abandoned, and travelers lived in fear of being caught between fleets. Some smaller civilizations tried to stay out of the war, but even they were pulled in. One side might demand supplies, the other might take them by force, and in the end, neutrality was nothing more than survival. Generations passed, and with them came stories. Children in distant worlds grew up hearing tales of ships vanishing in the void, of armies fighting on burning plains, and of empires so stubborn that they would destroy the galaxy before admitting defeat. The war became a shadow that stretched across the stars. It seemed eternal without hope of change. Among the soldiers of both sides, there were whispers. In quiet moments, away from commanders and battle orders, some wondered what it was all for. Veterans remembered faces of friends long gone, victories that felt hollow, and defeats that returned again and again. But those whispers never left the silence of private thoughts. No one dared to speak too loudly, for to question the war was to question their very way of life. While the great empires clashed, humanity remained unnoticed. Earth was far from the central war zones. Humanity was young among the stars, only a few centuries into space travel, with ships that seemed small compared to the massive fleets of the Dominion and the Alliance. In the records of both empires, humans were marked as unimportant, a minor species, a people not worth considering in the grand conflict, but humanity was watching. Every signal that traveled across the void carried stories of battles and destruction. Every passing fleet reminded them that the galaxy beyond Earth was locked in a cycle of violence. And though humans lacked the fleets of the Dominion or the strategies of the Alliance, they carried something different, an ability to see with fresh eyes. The war had become a game of numbers for the empires. Ship against ship, soldier against soldier, weapon against weapon. To them it was all about balance and power. Yet humans with no history tied to the conflict could see the tragedy for what it was. Two mighty civilizations locked in chains of their own making. In the quiet halls of human ships, captains spoke to their crews. They reminded them that war without reason was not strength but weakness. In classrooms on Earth, children learned not only about technology and science but also about choices, compassion, and the cost of violence. Though humanity did not yet know it, they were preparing for a role greater than anyone imagined. The Dominion and the Alliance had fought for centuries without end. Their leaders believed that no force could ever bring peace. They were wrong. For somewhere beyond the edge of their endless war, humans were rising, and soon, the galaxy would discover that the smallest voice can silence the loudest guns, and the simplest act can change the course of history. The war seemed unstoppable, a storm that swept through the stars. But history was not finished. A new chapter was waiting to be written, and humanity would hold the pen. In the galaxy filled with giants, humans were almost invisible. The Dominion and the Alliance cared little for them. To the great empires, Humanity was too young, too small, and too inexperienced to matter. Their fleets were tiny compared to the endless armadas that battled across star systems. Their colonies were few and scattered. Their history in space was short. If the records of the Dominion or the Alliance mentioned humans at all, it was only in passing. To them, Earth and its people were just another minor world. But what the empires failed to see was that being overlooked gave humans freedom. While the Dominion and Alliance wasted centuries in war, humanity built quietly. They expanded from Earth to nearby systems, learning step by step how to survive in space. Their ships were modest, but they were flexible. Their colonies were small, but they grew with strong bonds of cooperation. Where other species might have struggled with pride, humans adapted. They made mistakes, learned quickly, and tried again. On Earth, the news of the galactic war reached often, carried by signals and travelers from other worlds. Children grew up hearing of battles far away, of planets falling under fire, of fleets locked in endless clashes. At first, these stories filled people with fear. Humanity had only begun to explore the stars, and already the universe seemed dangerous. But as the years passed, a different feeling took root. People began to wonder why the great empires fought without end. Why could no one stop them? Why did no one even try? On distant colonies, the same question spread. Farmers on Mars spoke of wasted harvests on worlds caught between the empires. Miners in the asteroid belts told of trade cut off by blockades. Teachers on Luna explained to children that sometimes strength without wisdom can cause more harm than weakness itself. Slowly, a quiet belief grew that perhaps humanity, small as it was, might one day make a difference. Still, most humans did not imagine themselves as heroes. They were busy with their own survival. Their fleets were mostly explorers, traders, and small patrols to defend against pirates. Their stations were built for research and growth, not war. Yet even without realizing it, they were shaping a new way of life. What set humans apart was not their weapons or their ships. It was their outlook. Other species had long been drawn into the endless war, forced to take sides or crushed under its weight. But humans had no stake in the old conflict. They saw it with fresh eyes, and they asked questions no one else dared to ask. Why fight forever? What was the point of destroying entire worlds if no true victory could be won? It was this different way of thinking that would soon bring humans to the center of history. The change began almost by chance. A small human convoy carrying supplies and settlers passed near the edge of a war zone. They had planned to avoid the conflict, as they always did, but in the emptiness of space they found something unexpected. A field of broken ships drifted, the remains of a battle that had ended only days before. Among the wreckage were survivors. Both Dominion and Alliance soldiers floated in damaged pods, injured, desperate, and waiting for rescue. For centuries, the rule of war had been simple. Each side cared only for its own. If survivors of the enemy were found, they were left to die. Mercy was weakness. That was the law of endless conflict. The human captain faced a choice. The safe path was to leave quickly before more ships arrived. But turning away meant leaving people, no matter their uniform, to die in silence. After a short debate, the humans decided they would help them all. Dominion, Alliance, it did not matter. Wounded were carried aboard. Air was shared. Food was given. The survivors were stunned. To them, kindness from the enemy was unthinkable. Many could not even understand why the humans would do such a thing. Some were suspicious, believing it was a trick. Yet day by day, the truth became clear. The humans asked for nothing. They only wanted lives to be saved. This simple act shook those who lived to tell of it. When they returned to their fleets, the stories spread. They spoke of a small species that cared more for life than victory. Soldiers whispered about the humans who had treated them not as enemies but as people. The whispers grew stronger with every retelling. Leaders in the Dominion and Alliance dismissed the stories at first. They called the humans foolish, weak, or naive. But soldiers in the field remembered the feeling of being rescued when no one else would come. And in a war where hope had long since died, even the smallest act of mercy was more powerful than the mightiest cannon. The Dominion and the Alliance had forgotten what kindness was. The war had erased it from their hearts, but the humans remembered, and that memory would not stay hidden for long. The empires believed the war would go on forever. Yet in the quiet corners of the galaxy, the smallest of species had taken the first step to prove them wrong. The story of humans rescuing survivors from both sides spread quietly across the galaxy. Soldiers whispered about it in camps and aboard ships. Commanders tried to silence the talk, but the words kept returning. The strange little species from Earth had done what neither empire had ever considered. They had shown mercy. To the Dominion, this was foolishness. To the Alliance, this was weakness. Yet to the men and women who had been saved, it was unforgettable. Still, the great empires believed humanity was too small to matter. They saw the story as nothing more than a passing tale, like a ripple in an ocean of war. But ripples have a way of growing when no one expects them to. Weeks later, a human vessel named Hope's Light entered a region scarred by heavy fighting. The ship was a transport built for trade and supply, not war. Its crew was a mix of explorers, medics, and traders. Their journey had been planned for a nearby colony in need of food and medicine. Yet in space, plans often changed. As Hope's Light passed through a system on the edge of conflict, the crew detected distress signals. At first, they thought it was wreckage left behind, but the signals were fresh. Someone was still alive. The captain, a steady man named Darren, faced a difficult decision. Entering the battlefield meant danger. Any side could mistake them for enemies. But to ignore a call for help went against everything humanity had come to believe about their role among the stars. "Set a course," Darren ordered. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "If someone is alive out there, we will not leave them behind." The crew obeyed even as tension filled the air. They knew they were sailing into danger, but their trust in one another was stronger than fear. Soon the wreckage came into view. Broken ships drifted across the void, their metal torn by weapons fire. Fires burned in shattered hulls and lifeless bodies floated in silence. But among the ruins were faint signals. Survivors. The crew moved quickly. Rescue teams launched shuttles and carried injured beings aboard. Medics rushed to treat wounds. The humans worked without hesitation, and soon the truth became clear. The survivors came from both sides of the endless war. Dominion soldiers and Alliance soldiers now lay side by side in the sickbay of Hope's Light. At first, the tension was unbearable. Glares passed between them and old hatred burned in their eyes. If not for their injuries, they might have fought even there under human care. But the humans ignored the hatred. They cleaned wounds, offered water, and shared food. To them, the uniform did not matter. A life was still a life. One Dominion officer asked why. His voice was weak, his body trembling from blood loss, but his eyes demanded an answer. "Why would you save me?" "I am your enemy." Darren looked at him with steady eyes. "We did not come here to choose sides. We came because no one deserves to die alone in the dark." The officer said nothing, but the words struck him harder than any weapon. For the first time in his long years of war, he was seen not as a soldier, but as a person. Days passed and the survivors recovered. In the halls of Hope's Light, enemies walked side by side. They spoke little at first, but hunger and need broke the silence. They ate the same meals, breathed the same air, and listened to the same human voices telling them to rest and heal. Slowly, the walls between them weakened. One night, two soldiers, one Dominion, one Alliance, sat together in the mess hall. They had been enemies since birth, but now they shared a table. The human medic who brought their food smiled and left them to eat. At first, they sat in silence. Then one spoke of his home world, a green place of rivers and mountains. The other answered with a story of his childhood on a desert moon. For a moment, they were no longer enemies, but simply people with memories of places they longed to see again. The empires would never have allowed such a moment. But on a human ship, far from the orders of war, it became possible. When the survivors were strong enough, Hope's Light brought them to a neutral station. There, they were returned to their fleets. The leaders of the Dominion and Alliance were not pleased. They saw the humans as interfering where they did not belong, yet they could not deny what had happened. Soldiers who once swore eternal hatred now returned with questions in their hearts. The commanders dismissed the humans as soft, but they did not understand the danger. For centuries, the war had been held together by hatred and fear. Now, humans had shown that even a small act of kindness could weaken that bond. As Hope's Light left the station, Captain Darren stood at the bridge window, watching the stars. He knew the mission had been dangerous, but he also knew it was right. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that this was only the beginning. Humanity had been forgotten, dismissed, and overlooked. But the galaxy had noticed them now. And the game, though no one admitted it yet, had already begun to change. The human ship Hope's Light had returned home, but the echoes of its mission traveled faster than its engines. Soldiers on both sides of the Great War spoke of humans who had treated enemies as friends. Leaders tried to silence the rumors, calling them false or foolish. Yet stories have a way of spreading where fear and anger cannot reach. For the Dominion and the Alliance, the war was not just about victory. It was about control. Their leaders depended on endless conflict to keep their people united. To question the war was to question the foundation of their power. But for the soldiers who had sat in the halls of a human ship, sharing food with those they once hated, the old lies felt weaker. Not long after, another human vessel named Aurora Dawn entered a sector heavy with ruins. The crew had been sent to chart new travel routes and avoid the main battle zones. What they found instead was a planet scarred by destruction. Its surface was gray and broken, as though firestorms had swept across it long ago. No cities stood, no life walked its plains, only silent towers buried in dust. Captain Leora, leader of the Aurora Dawn, ordered a closer scan. At first the planet seemed lifeless, but deep beneath the surface faint signals pulsed. They were weak like whispers from the past, yet steady enough to suggest purpose. The crew debated whether to investigate. Some argued it was dangerous. Others believed it could be a trap set by one of the empires. But curiosity was strong, and Leora chose to land. The landing team moved carefully through the ruins. They found broken machines, walls carved with unknown markings, and great halls now filled with silence. Dust rose at every step, but beneath it all lay something more. Hidden chambers contained archives glowing faintly even after centuries of abandonment. The machines that powered them had outlived their makers. When the humans connected their tools, the truth unfolded. The planet had once belonged to a thriving people, now long extinct. Their records spoke of a time when they too had fought a war with no end. At first it was small, fought for pride and territory. But over centuries the conflict grew until every part of their world was touched by destruction. Their leaders promised victory again and again. Yet each promise ended with greater loss. At last, when their world was nearly gone, the survivors built machines to send a signal into the stars. The signal was a plea, a cry for help, carrying the memory of their downfall. Then silence followed. The war consumed them and their voices faded. The humans listened with heavy hearts. They realized the repeating signal that had drawn them to the ruins was not a trap, nor a weapon. It was the last cry of a lost people, echoing across ages, unheard by the great empires who cared only for their own struggles. In that moment, the crew understood something important. The Dominion and the Alliance were not the first to wage an endless war. Others had done the same, and they had destroyed themselves. Unless something changed, the two empires now locked in conflict would share the same fate. The discovery spread quickly among human colonies. The archives were copied, translated, and shared. Teachers spoke of the lost civilization in classrooms. Leaders on Earth debated how best to use the knowledge. Many argued that the empires would ignore the truth as they always had. But others believed the records held power. If soldiers could see what endless war would lead to, perhaps they would find courage to break free from it. Not all agreed on what to do. Some humans feared that revealing too much would draw the wrath of both empires. The Dominion and the Alliance had no love for outsiders interfering in their affairs. If they learned that humans were digging into the past, they might turn their guns toward Earth. Still, the truth was too great to keep hidden. Captain Leora sent a message to the nearest neutral station, carrying copies of the archives. She explained that the humans had no wish to take sides, but wanted all species to know the danger of repeating history. The message was simple: war without end leads only to silence. The news spread faster than expected. Soldiers across the galaxy heard of the lost world and its fate. For some, it meant little. They were too hardened by years of fighting to believe in lessons from the past. But for others, the truth was like a spark in the darkness. They began to wonder if the humans were right. Meanwhile, leaders of the Dominion and the Alliance grew uneasy. They tried to discredit the archives, calling them lies invented by humans to weaken their armies. Yet the more they denied, the more soldiers questioned. Whispers became stronger, and doubt began to creep into the hearts of those who had once followed orders without question. Back on Earth, people looked to the stars with both hope and fear. They had uncovered a truth powerful enough to shake the greatest empires, but they knew danger was coming. Humans had stepped into a story larger than themselves, and now the eyes of the galaxy were turning toward them. The Dominion and the Alliance had fought for centuries, believing nothing could end their war. But the lost records proved otherwise. Wars could end, not with victory but with ruin. And the smallest of species had dared to remind the galaxy of that truth. The discovery of the lost records spread like fire through the stars. To the humans, it was a warning. To the soldiers of the Dominion and the Alliance, it was a mirror of their own lives. But to the leaders of both empires, it was a threat. They feared that soldiers would lose faith, that doubt would weaken discipline, and that the endless war would finally break apart. Soon, human colonies began receiving messages. Some came from frightened soldiers who wanted to know more about the records. Others came from neutral traders who had heard whispers and asked if the story was true. But not all messages carried curiosity. Many carried warnings. Dominion officials accused humans of spreading false information. Alliance commanders demanded the records be destroyed. Both sides sent the same order in different words: stay silent or face consequences. On Earth, leaders gathered to discuss their path. They met in great halls, speaking late into the night. Some argued for silence. They said humanity was still small, with little power compared to the massive fleets of the empires. To stand against them would be reckless. If humanity interfered further, they risked bringing the full weight of war upon themselves. Others disagreed. They said that silence would make them no better than those who ignored the cries of the lost world. Humanity had learned the truth. They could not hide it away, even if it meant danger. For what value was there in survival if it came at the cost of turning away from those who suffered? The debate grew fierce. Some feared doom. Others called for courage. And through it all, the question remained: what role should humanity play in the galaxy? Were they only survivors on the edge of great powers, or were they something more? While the leaders argued, ordinary humans made choices of their own. Colonists continued to share the records. Teachers told the stories to children, and explorers carried copies across the stars. No law could stop the truth once it had touched hearts. Humanity was already changing the game, even as its leaders struggled to decide their official path. On the ship Aurora Dawn, Captain Leora received a direct message from a Dominion commander. The words were sharp and cold. "You will stop spreading lies. If we see another of your ships near our borders, we will fire without warning." Hours later, a second message came, this time from an Alliance fleet. "Your actions weaken the cause of justice. If you continue, we will not protect you from what follows." Leora read both messages carefully. Then she gathered her crew. They sat around a table, tired but determined. She told them of the threats. She told them that if they continued their mission, they might not return home. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. At last, Mira, the ship's engineer, spoke. "We came here to explore. We came to learn, but we also came to help. If we walk away now, what makes us different from those who let the lost world die? I say we keep going." Others nodded, some slowly, some with fire in their eyes. They knew the danger, but they also knew the truth. Their actions mattered. Small as they were, they had made soldiers question a war older than their own history in space. That was not weakness. That was power of another kind. The crew voted, and their choice was clear. They would continue. Humanity would not hide. Back on Earth, leaders finally reached a decision too. It was not easy, and many still feared what would come, but they agreed on one principle. Humanity would stand by the truth. They would not destroy the records. They would not silence their voices. If the empires demanded silence, then humanity would refuse. The news spread across human colonies. Some people cheered, proud that their species had chosen courage over fear. Others worried, knowing war could now reach their homes. But in every heart, one feeling was stronger than all others: purpose. Humanity was no longer only watching history. They were shaping it. Meanwhile, in the war zone, something began to shift. Soldiers from both sides started to gather secretly near human stations. They came not to fight, but to ask questions. Some came wounded, seeking medicine. Others came tired, seeking rest. And every time the humans treated them the same. No uniforms, no sides. Only lives in need. These small acts built something new. Around human outposts, small zones of peace began to form. For the first time in centuries, Dominion and Alliance soldiers stood in the same place without weapons raised. They did not trust each other, but they trusted the humans who had saved them. The leaders of the Dominion and the Alliance raged at this news. They called it rebellion. They called it betrayal. But no matter what they called it, they could not erase it. Humanity had made its choice, and the galaxy had noticed. The zones around human stations grew slowly, like tiny lights in a dark galaxy. Soldiers from the Dominion and the Alliance came not with weapons drawn, but with bandages around their arms and tiredness in their eyes. They came because the humans gave what no one else did, help without asking for loyalty. At first, these safe zones were small. A single outpost, a single medical ship. But the idea spread. Neutral space began to glow with new life as humans offered food, water, and care. They carried no mighty fleets, but their actions carried weight greater than any weapon. On the Aurora Dawn, Captain Leora watched as their small station became crowded with visitors. Dominion fighters who once swore never to stand beside an Alliance soldier now sat across from one another in the dining hall. The silence between them was heavy, but they did not fight. For the first time in centuries, they were simply people, not enemies. Mira, the engineer, walked through the station halls and studied the broken machines left behind by the war. Many of them were drones built for battle, their programming locked into endless cycles of destruction. Dominion drones were cold and sharp. Alliance machines were heavy and powerful. All of them were created to kill. Mira stood over one of the lifeless drones and thought deeply. If these machines were built to destroy, could they also be changed to build? She shared her idea with the crew. At first, they were uncertain. The risk was great. The machines could reawaken and turn against them. But Mira believed in human creativity. She believed that if destruction could be designed, so too could renewal. Together, the crew began their work. They stripped the drones of weapons and replaced their programs. The machines that once tracked targets were given tasks to measure soil, carry supplies, and rebuild walls. The arms that once held cannons now carried tools. It was not easy, and many times the machines malfunctioned, but step by step they began to change. The first rebuilt drones rolled out of the station one quiet morning. Instead of scanning for enemies, they carried building materials to the ruined surface of a nearby moon. There, under human guidance, they repaired shelters, cleared wreckage, and planted the first seeds in soil long burned by war. The soldiers who watched could hardly believe it. For their whole lives, machines had only brought destruction. Now they saw the same metal forms lifting beams, laying foundations, and raising shelters where none stood before. Some laughed in disbelief. Others wept quietly. Word spread quickly. Soldiers returned to their fleets with stories of machines once built for war, now serving peace. They spoke of humans who dared to imagine a different purpose for tools of death. Many who heard dismissed the stories. Others listened and began to hope. In time, Dominion and Alliance deserters began to gather near human zones. They were tired of fighting, tired of orders that led to endless loss. They wanted to see the machines with their own eyes. They wanted to believe change was possible. Around the humans, they found something they had not known in centuries: renewal. The leaders of the empires grew more furious with every report. Dominion officials called the human work dangerous corruption. Alliance commanders claimed it was a trick meant to weaken their resolve. But no matter what words they used, the fact remained. Soldiers who once obeyed without question now hesitated. Some refused orders altogether, choosing instead to seek out human stations. On Earth, the people followed the news with a mix of fear and pride. They knew the danger was rising. At any moment, the Dominion or the Alliance might send fleets to crush them. Yet they also saw the proof that their efforts mattered. Where once there was only rubble, now stood the beginnings of homes. Where once there was despair, now flickered hope. Captain Leora stood at the edge of the moon one evening, watching the drones raise a new shelter beneath the fading light of distant stars. Soldiers from both sides worked side by side, carrying supplies, patching walls, and sharing quiet meals. She felt the weight of the moment. Humanity had no massive fleets, no grand armies. Yet they had changed the course of history with nothing more than stubborn kindness and the courage to imagine a different path. Mira joined her hands still covered in grease from long hours repairing machines. She looked at the glowing shelters below and smiled. "We were told these machines could only destroy," she said. "But maybe the same is true for all of us. Maybe we can all choose a different way." Leora nodded. "And if we can, then so can the galaxy." The spark of renewal had been lit. It was small and fragile, threatened by the anger of mighty empires, but it was real. Humanity had turned tools of war into builders. They had shown that even in the darkest times, creation could rise from destruction. The Dominion and the Alliance had fought for centuries, each believing the war could never end. But now they faced something they could not destroy with weapons. They faced the proof that another future was possible, and for the first time the galaxy dared to wonder, if humans could change the machines, could they also change the hearts of empires? The spark that began on a single ruined moon spread faster than anyone expected. Soldiers carried stories of human stations where enemies worked side by side. Traders told of machines once built for war now raising homes and clearing fields. The whispers grew into voices and the voices into movements. The Dominion and the Alliance grew uneasy. Their leaders tried to stop the change with commands and threats, but the soldiers who once obeyed without thought now hesitated. Some refused to fight near human zones. Others abandoned their posts entirely to seek the safety of neutral ground. The war machine began to slow. Humanity had not planned to become the center of the galaxy's attention. They had no great fleets to defend themselves, no vast armies to enforce their will. Yet their simple acts of mercy had done what centuries of weapons could not. They had planted doubt in the hearts of warriors. They had reminded them of something greater than orders. On Earth, the leaders met once more. They knew the empires would not stay silent. Already, fleets gathered at borders waiting for an excuse to strike. The humans faced a choice. They could retreat into silence and hope to be forgotten again, or they could take a step no one had ever dared to take. After long hours of debate, they chose. Humanity would send a signal, not a cry for help like the one from the lost world, not a command for surrender, but a message of hope, a message for the galaxy itself. Scientists, engineers, and storytellers worked together. They built transmitters powerful enough to carry the signal beyond the farthest stars. They crafted words simple enough for every species to understand, yet strong enough to reach hearts hardened by war. The message was tested again and again. At last, the time came. The humans gathered on Earth and across the colonies. Screens lit up. Voices hushed. Captain Leora stood before the final console aboard the Aurora Dawn. With a steady hand, she pressed the command that would send the signal across the galaxy. The message began. We are the people of Earth. We are small compared to the empires. But we have learned something they have forgotten. War without end is not strength. To destroy everything is not victory. We have seen what happens when war is all that remains, and we refuse to walk that path. To every soldier, to every world, we say this. There is another way. Come and see. Build instead of destroy. Heal instead of wound. If you cannot find peace where you are, you will find it with us. You are not our enemies. You are our neighbors in the stars. The signal repeated, carried by relay after relay, spreading like light into the darkness. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy heard not the sound of war, but the voice of peace. At first, the empires responded with anger. Dominion fleets jammed the message where they could. Alliance leaders called it dangerous propaganda. But no matter what they did, the signal traveled too far, carried too wide. Soldiers on the front lines heard it. Colonists in broken worlds heard it. Children in distant systems heard it. And once heard, it could not be forgotten. Across battlefields, strange things began to happen. In some places, soldiers laid down their weapons and refused to fight. In others, units on both sides agreed to short truces so they could listen to the human signal together. Some leaders sent orders for punishment, but punishment could not silence a thought once it had taken root. The humans did not stop there. Around their stations, they raised symbols of peace that no weapon could erase. Fields of crops grew on land once scarred by fire. Lights shone from shelters rebuilt from wreckage. And in every corner their signal played, reminding all who listened that another future was possible. Captain Leora watched it unfold with quiet pride. She knew the empires still held power enough to crush humanity if they chose. Yet she also knew something greater. Power built on fear weakens when people no longer believe in it. The Dominion and the Alliance had ruled through endless war. But now their soldiers were beginning to believe in something else. Mira stood beside her, her eyes bright as she watched drones build yet another shelter. We have sent our message, she said softly. Do you think they will listen? They already are, Leora replied. Even if it takes years, the war will not last forever. It cannot. Too many hearts have changed, and she was right. Slowly, battles that should have raged for days ended in silence. Commanders found their soldiers unwilling to kill those they had seen healed by human hands. Armies grew restless. Fleets grew tired. The war that had lasted longer than human history in space began to falter. It did not end in a single day. It did not end with one grand treaty, but it ended all the same. It ended because the smallest of species dared to believe that mercy was stronger than hate. In the records of the galaxy, the war was remembered not for its countless battles, but for how it ended. And it ended when humans sent a signal that changed everything. The last lines of the message became the most repeated words in the stars. You are not our enemies. You are our neighbors in the stars. And with those words, humanity had done what no empire could. They had stopped the war.